So now the G20 is done. Clearly, many are saying this is historic for the fact that the joint declaration was announced, the economic corridor, the biofuel alliance. But now it's going to be back to politics. We know that the special session will begin of Parliament from next Monday. It's going to be for 5 days. Surely the G20 will feature in some big way in that Parliament session. How has the opposition been reacting to the events in Delhi over the last couple of days?
Well, I mean, they have not been enthusiastic at all, but more than that, I would say it's largely the Congress party. I mean, I would still say that Mamata Banerjee has been a little bit more astute, so as the other political parties, even in the India front, have been very careful and nuanced in their responses, because they do know the perils of attacking the government on the G20, especially on the threshold of success of the New Delhi declaration. They know that this is something which could boomerang on them. That's why they have been very careful. Mamata Banerjee, in fact, attended the presidential banquet. She's not been speaking out much, and of the Congress party is the one who have been the most critical. Even as we speak, and I was noticing it the whole of yesterday, they have been taking pot shots at the G20 summit. First of all, saying it's no big deal. We did it too. We also had international summits which we hosted. So what's the big deal? It's overhyped. It was very natural that India would get presidency. And second, of course, they kept on raising the Manipur issue, the Adani issue, by making a point that when you talk about one earth, one family, one future, all that the Prime Minister cares about is himself and one corporate sector and so on and so forth. But apart from that, taking constant personal pot shots at the Prime Minister has been the point. And, you know, I mean, in regards to facilities at the Mandapam, all of this has been raised. So I suspect that when the Parliament session begins, that special session, that attack will particularly come in from the Congress party. And very quickly, at the presidential banquet yesterday, barring the Himachal Pradesh Chief Minister, the three prominent Congress Chief Minister, whether it's Ashok Gehlot, Bhupesh Baghel, as well as Siddaramaiah, all three of them gave a skip. Of course, officially, they are not giving any such reason that they are boycotting it, having attacked the BJP for not giving importance enough to President Murmu during the inauguration of the new Parliament session. They certainly cannot afford to say so, but the fact remains is that only one Chief Minister among the Congress party actually turned up at the presidential banquet late last night.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Pallavi Ghosh, many thanks for joining us. So officially the G20 hosted by Delhi has concluded. Some very, very significant boxes have been ticked off. Let me get an assessment of how the Delhi G20 will be remembered. Rama Chalani, Strategic Affairs expert, is now joining us. Thank you very much, Professor Chalani. You've been a fellow traveler with us over the last couple of days. In your view, how will the Delhi G20 be remembered? What are the biggest takeaways as far as you're concerned?
Well, the two takeaways from the New Delhi summit, the first is its first enlargement. This is the first enlargement of the G20 since it was formed in 1999. And by adding the African Union as a permanent member, the G20 officially has become a G21 grouping. And the next summit will be officially called the G21 Summit in Rio, Brazil. But I think giving voice to Africa has also helped reduce the underrepresentation of the Global South, because the G20 has been, thus far, a largely Western-dominated organization. So including the African Union was a very important step in making the G20, now the G21, more inclusive. The second aspect which will be remembered is that after the great division and acrimony in Bali at the last G20 summit, not many expected the New Delhi summit to produce a forward-looking consensus document. But to the surprise of everyone, not only did the New Delhi summit produce a consensus document, it produced a 37-page forward-looking document that addresses all the key global challenges. And the contentious section on Ukraine really reflects the new realities a year and a half after the war in Ukraine began, because there is a degree of Ukraine fatigue that is setting in even in the West. And therefore, compromise became possible in New Delhi. That by itself was so important, so critical to the eventual adoption of the 37-page consensus document.
I also want to ask you about your thoughts on this new economic corridor that's been announced from India through Saudi Arabia and the UAE all the way to the Western European countries of France, Germany and Italy, of course backed by the United States. Do you think this is the most significant challenge to the Belt and Road Initiative of China and of Xi Jinping? In fact, it's exactly 10 years since the Belt and Road was launched. Do you think this is these countries sort of throwing the gauntlet down at Xi Jinping, and specifically on the One Belt and One Road?
I think both the announcement of this corridor as well as the G20 decision to help reshape multilateral lending organizations like the World Bank, making the World Bank larger in terms of its lending capacity. These developments are clearly a counter to China's lending power. China has emerged as the world's largest sovereign creditor to developing countries. But the problem with Chinese lending is that it's very opaque. Almost every Chinese loan issued in the last decade has included a sweeping secrecy clause compelling the borrowing country not to disclose the loan's terms. In some cases, even the loan's existence is prohibited. The result is that many African, Asian, and Latin American countries have become ensnared in a debt trap, leaving them highly vulnerable to Chinese pressure to pursue policies that advance Beijing's economic and geopolitical interests. So there is a pushback now, even in the developing world, against this sort of predatory lending by China. Given this reality, the Biden-initiated corridor, the Biden-initiated attempt to reshape and enlarge the lending capacity of the World Bank, these are moves clearly designed to utilize the new environment, the new geopolitical environment, to push back against China's colonial-style lending practices.
All right, Professor Brahmacharani, thank you very much for your thoughts, your perspective on what has been achieved at the Delhi G20 edition. Clearly, these are the big two takeaways. The fact that a joint declaration was arrived at, the language of the Ukraine war, in the Bali declaration was just 2 paragraphs. It's now been expanded to 8 paragraphs. Of course, you can criticize it for saying that, it does not name Russia directly. That's perhaps why the joint declaration came about. The other important thing, of course, is this economic corridor, which is huge. It is unequivocally the biggest challenge yet to China's Belt and Road Initiative. We'll play out a soundbite of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He's spoken to the news agency ANI, and right after that, we'll also play out an excerpt from the interview that I had with Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia University, and he too thinks that this challenge to the BRI in the form of this economic corridor from India through Arabia and through to Europa, as many call it, that is the most significant development out of the Delhi G20.
Von Staaten der Ukraine außer Frage steht, dass nicht mit Gewalt Grenzen verschoben werden sollen. Und ich bin auch sehr froh darüber, dass erneut noch einmal ein klares Bekenntnis gegen den Einsatz von Nuklearwaffen hier zum Ausdruck gebracht worden ist. Und das, finde ich, sind gute Ergebnisse, die für diesen Gipfel hier festgehalten werden können. Für mich ist auch wichtig, dass es hier ein neues Miteinander gegeben hat zwischen den klassischen Staaten des Nordens in Europa und im Norden Amerikas und den Ländern im Süden Amerikas, Asiens und Afrikas. Eine gute Kooperation mit bedeutenden G20-Staaten, deren ökonomisches Gewicht und deren wachsende Bevölkerung in der Zukunft auch dafür sprechen, dass wir jetzt die Grundlage dafür legen, dass es gute Zusammenarbeit gibt. Das ist gelungen in Konsequenz all der vielen Gespräche, die in den letzten 2 Jahren stattgefunden haben. Und diese Kooperation hat es dann auch möglich gemacht, dass Entscheidungen getroffen worden sind, bei denen Russland akzeptieren musste, dass die Weltgemeinschaft die gewalttätigen Prinzipien russischer Politik nicht richtig findet, sondern sich auch mit den Worten, die hier gefunden worden sind, dagegen stellt.